continue to work, okay? Emily, will you pick those up for me, please? Make sure your name's on it, okay? This reading that you had is on assessment. And you know, if you read that beginning part of the Peterson, you know that Chris, who is the author, Chris is one of the things that he talks about in this is that assessment is a huge part of our job as a music educator. Talk to me about that. Why is that a huge part as a music educator? Yes.
Assessments help educators know where their kids are at and like what pace that they're learning at, and also gives us feedback on what we can do better and how we can make sure that we meet the students.
Yeah. Now, talk to me about why is it that you think that assessment is not a topic that a lot of people talk about? Yes.
Assessments are often perceived negatively because of how we're assessing our core curriculum. It tends to have a lot of negative connotation with quizzes and tests because that's how they're formatted, but assessments don't always have to be that way. But it's how the majority of the population perceives them and experiences them.
Right, exactly, no doubt. And in fact, I did an assessment already this morning, right? What did I do? I did an assessment as far as I wanted to know if you had a sense of the difference between what? Progress and achievement. So let's talk about that. Who would be willing to tackle what progress is? What is progress? Yeah, let's hear, yeah.
I would define progress as the active development of skills and knowledge towards a certain subject, while achievement is the completion of certain.
Whoa. Let's just do progress. But good for you, okay, yes. Okay, progress, okay. And was there something, what word do we want to just to use there? Continuous, right, okay, good. All right, and who wants to tackle achievement? Anybody want to tackle achievement on that? Yes.
It's more of a goal that the student has to reach a certain proficiency in a certain area. It does not matter necessarily where they started or where they're gonna end. It's just if they're able to do this, yes or no.
Okay. All right. Anybody else wants to tackle either one of those two, whether it be progress or achievement? Maybe something you want to add to that. Either one of those, yes.
I kind of want to add that progress can also be seen as an achievement because sometimes it's like our achievements are practicing or reaching some points. So they correlate a lot and they go hand in hand a lot. But I feel like it's important to know that we can't just set achievement as something more or like progress as something less than an achievement, if that makes sense. Because progress is what leads us to what we deem as achievements. But I don't know if I'm like putting that in the words that are making sense. But yeah, I think that's really important.
Okay. I like this. For me, you can have your own definition, but I have written in my margin of this, I have written this definition. Maybe this resonates to you, but for me, I like this that I put in. Progress refers to the continuous development towards a goal. Okay? While, so that's progress, while achievement is the successful completion of that goal for a refers to the continuous development towards a goal, while achievement is the successful completion of that goal or a specific task. Okay? Now, why do you think that I'm making such a big deal out of progress versus achievement? Why do you think that's important to know as a music educator? Yes,
The students will be coming in at different levels.
definitely. Yes, that's so true. What else, Shanice?
It's important to make distinctions about what exactly you're assessing in your students.
Mm-hmm. Yes. What else? Mm-hmm.
Most of our work takes place in the progress to get to where we want to, and that may not always be what we expect it to when we get there.
That is so
So we're
true.
constantly going progress before we reach somewhere, and I don't think, even when we do reach a certain goal, I feel like it's constantly moving up and moving as we go.
This should be where we live most of the time. So, can we state what is our goal? What do you think our goal should be as music educators? What is our ultimate goal as a music educator for our students in our classroom? Have you ever thought about that? That may somewhat relate to your music philosophy. That's why I'm doing this right after your music philosophy. What is our goal as a music educator? Is it to be liked by our students? Okay, right? I mean, we're all human. We want to be liked, of course, yes. But hopefully it's not to be liked by our students. Is it to get all trophies? You know, sweepstakes? All of those are nice pats on the back, but is that really the goal? What is our goal as a music educator? Yes.
Okay. For the students to love and learn music.
Okay.
That makes sense.
For students to love and learn music, okay. All right. What else? Shanice?
To help them grow as musicians.
To help grow as musicians, okay. What else could possibly be our goals for our students? What are we trying to progress toward, you think? Any other thoughts? Yes,
Can that kind of be similar to the first one, but to also learn how to appreciate music?
learn how to appreciate music, okay? Okay. How about this? Now this is really fancy, okay? For someone who has spent a lifetime in music advocacy and music philosophy, but to make lifelong consumers of music. Now what does that mean? Let's unpack what that means. What does that mean? Yes.
I think it means like you want your students to have like a good relationship with music and to like take it with them wherever they are. You know,
Mhm.
they're not like going to become music educators, that they can be involved with music somehow in their
Not all of our students will be music educators, right? Some of them might be, you know, a doctor, or some of them might be a lawyer, or maybe some of them might be, I mean, who knows, many different vocations, right? But we want them to, no matter what type of vocation, for them to be able to have a lifelong, the ability to have a lifelong consumer relationship with music. That consumer part maybe make you think, okay, now what does that mean? That means that they know how to be able to interact with music, appreciate music, yes. But they also have to know what? The nuts and bolts of music, right? They need to know music literacy, right? So you understand how all of this starts to relate more and more to your job as a teacher. For them to be really consumers of music, it can be too much, too surface. They also have to have enough depth as well to it as well, right? So all of these things are really important as you're working on your progress in your teaching toward your students. The reason why I'm making such a big deal out of assessment is because it's not, to be honest with you, it is the thing that, you know, people kind of like, oh, it does have a negative connotation, right? But why do we have to make sure we know how to assess our students? Yes?
So that we actually know how to help them grow and move forward.
Yes. There is, we have to be able to show, we have to be able to know how our students are growing, right? I mean, just so that we know that our students are growing. So there's that part, okay? But there's also the advocacy part too. And that is, we have to be able to know that our students are growing, so we know that they are toward the goal of consuming music, for lifelong consuming music, but for the advocacy of what? That if a principal comes in and says, now what are you teaching in this class? Okay? And you can say, here's what I'm teaching, boom, 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 and you can show it. Now luckily for you, what do you have to show that you have a curriculum, that you have specific goals to teach in your class? The T's, exactly. So there, see, that's a first line of defense for advocacy right there. Now you have to follow them, right? So you can't just sing a bunch of songs, okay? Gather around the campfire, y'all, let's sing, right? You have to actually do some things with that, right? But isn't that so great that because if it's in the curriculum, it is already valued. So that's wonderful. We can't take that for granted because in the 70s and 80s, that wasn't always the case in a lot of the states. Okay? Okay. Now, let's keep talking about this, okay? Because for all of this to happen, we have to set up our classroom in a way for this to, this doesn't happen just by accident, okay? Now I want you to really focus in because I want to tell you, this is not, I'm gonna be frank with you, this is not my favorite lecture to give, okay? But I have to give it to you because this is where, to be frank with you, this is where the magic happens, okay? It's not where the most exciting teaching happens, okay? I will tell you, right? But this is where the magic happens because you get to see how Nina is growing as a musician. So, how are we going to structure our class, okay? Oh, can I erase this? Are you guys ready? You writing this down, right? You need to screenshot it before I erase it?
Let me take
Okay. I love this because they said, y'all better make sure that you write this down, you writing this down, and then people just like, what? Got it. Okay to erase it now? Okay, good. So, for this to take place, what do we have to make sure that we have in place? So this is what we have to have happen, okay? Really, we have to have a four-pronged approach when we're thinking about this, okay? All right. Curriculum. We're going to talk about that. What is your curriculum? Okay? Instruction. Okay? Assessment, which we're just talking about now. Okay? And then the last pillar is evaluation. Okay, so let's see if we can kind of come up with what should kind of come under each one of these headings, okay? All right, what do you think I mean by curriculum? Yes? Okay, teach, but broader than that. What does that mean? What is taught, right? What is taught? And you're right, teach, okay? Now, can we just put a little pause on this? Because we were having this conversation with several of you in your C class, because I think for several of you, you're having some problems within your C class, having to come up with trying to think about TEKS and your curriculum. And in many ways, you were thinking about this backwards than how we normally do in music classroom, right? Because I think how you were being asked to do it in your C class was to first start off with your T, right? Well, that's not quite how we do it in the music classroom. Because in reality, what you should do from day one, after you hear where your students are, what have you done already? Once you heard your students from day one, what have you done either formally or informally? What have you assessed? Their prior knowledge. Okay, and you have said, oh my Lord, they don't know this, and this, and this, right? Right? And then are you going to say, bye y'all, I'm gone? No, what are you going to say?
Okay.
Okay, here you go. Roll up your sleeves, and if it's going to be, it's up to me, right? Okay, because you just don't know. I mean, if you're a middle school teacher, you have all these other elementary schools. Perhaps they're all on the same page. Perhaps they're not on the same page. You don't know. And maybe this elementary school has gotten together, and they've got all their stuff being taught well. Maybe this elementary school has been kind of a revolving door. You don't know. Or maybe they're all on the same page and they're doing great, okay? So they're coming to you. But even in the best of circumstances, are all of your students going to be on the same level? Even in the best of circumstances, all of your students are not going to be on the same level. So you're going to assess where your students are, okay? I think this is one of the areas that students get really anxious about. Would you agree with that? When you all think about this, does this give you a lot of anxiety about how to get your students where they need to be? Okay, all right, so you're gonna find out, let's just say, for example, you have Nina here, okay, and she knows all of her lines and spaces, okay, on the treble and bass clef, okay, and then Mike enters, okay, in 6th grade, and he doesn't even know what a treble clef is, okay? So what are you gonna do? Well, you're gonna start from the very beginning, and you're gonna teach, right? And once you kind of establish that, okay, Nina knows knows all of this stuff, Mike has no clue, you're going to teach in an engaging way, right? Fast, but not too fast. And then once you kind of figure out, okay, Nina knows what's going on, Mike doesn't, Mike is the only person who doesn't know in the whole class, what can you do? Do you slow the whole class down and then teach to one person? What might be a strategy that you could do? You got to get Mike up to speed, right? You can't just leave Mike behind. Please don't leave me behind.
Is there a way to like meet with students like after and like to reach out to the parents and offer help in that?
You could. That's gonna take your time.
Exactly.
Yeah. But is there a way that you can maybe get Mike up to speed and also, like, Nina's just bored. Now Nina's like, why did I sign up for this great course? This is the same thing as I learned in 4th grade. But maybe also engage Nina, peer help, okay? Maybe this is a way like, Nina, do you mind taking Mike, and see if you can teach him today? Your goal is to teach him just the lines of the treble clef, maybe, right? What if we have more than just Mike? Maybe it's Mike and Emily, okay? Well, maybe you need another. And it's like, I know my lines and spaces. maybe we need more than just one peer tutor, okay? And that's okay, right? One of the things I just want you to understand is don't be afraid to engage your students as teachers too. And time again, I have come to realize that your students can be excellent teachers, and sometimes in a way they can explain it that maybe really resonates to your students. Okay? So don't be afraid to use those, okay? All right, so curriculum is what is taught, but in the C class, where I was going with this is, some of you were, I think, a little confused because you felt like you had to get the teach first. So you're there from day one, you're assessing, and then you're like, okay, what do I need to do? Okay, I'm listening. Okay, here's what we need to do. I'm listening to this group. Okay, I've got several people who are not matching pitch. Okay, already you're starting to know what you need to get happen there, right? You hear that you need to work on what? Vowels, right? You can hear that once you get above the middle part of the range, is the tone starts to get pinched. They're not opening and working with their soft palate as they engage the upper part of the range. So we can just go on and on and on. And you're informally assessing them on a bunch of that stuff. Okay, so then what do you do from there?
Then you do the curriculum, like you look for the peaks that you need and like your class needs.
Okay, but then how do you, yes, but then before we get to the teaks, I've got to build a curriculum. And what is our curriculum? What is our music? Our repertoire. In choir, the repertoire is the curriculum, right? And I don't know if we all get in. I do that with with a cappella choir, with chamber singers. I look at this and say, this would be a great learning opportunity. This would be a great growing piece for this group, okay? Even at the collegiate level, okay? You need to do it for your middle school singers, for your elementary singers, for your high school singers, okay? You say, okay, this would really work on my sopranos because they go sharp at E, F, F sharp, G, which is a very common thing for 9th grade sopranos and particularly 7th and 8th grade sopranos in middle school, okay? This kind of hovers around there. Don't shy away from it. Now, maybe that's not the piece you want to take to UIL, right? You want to be smart, maybe not take that to UIL, right? But doesn't mean that you want to shy away from it because then you're passing the buck to somebody else. If it's going to be, it's up to you, me, right? You have to make sure that you help them get there, right? What are some other things that you can think about that maybe you need to work on at the middle school level? What's another common thing that is an issue at the middle school level? Let's see have you all been in the middle school choir classroom at this point? Okay. What else are you noticing?
Balance.
Balance, okay? So what are some things that we could work on with balance? Here's an issue with balance in the middle school level. With the way that they have scored, a lot of times with 3-part mixed voicing, a lot of times the way that they have scored music, the 3-part, the lower part male is typically in the upper part of their range, where a lot of times then the alto, the lower female voice is collapsed. It keeps them in the lower part of their range, okay? So you can already see there's already gonna be some, what? Balance issues that you've got to work around, yeah? Okay? So what are some strategies that we could do with that? Maybe look for some, what? Some pieces where the sopranos and altos have more expanded ranges. Or like what I did when I was teaching middle school, like you were not considered a soprano, you're not considered an alto, you were a red and you were a yellow. And on this part, and this song, the red sang part 2 and you would sing part 1. And then on the other song, you would switch. Now, I couldn't teach that way my first year, right? Because even at the first year, I mean, there were people who were like, no, I'm an alto. Well, yeah, alto. We know there's no sopranos and altos at the middle school level, right? Can we just make sure we know that? It's a female range, okay? Or a treble range, if you want to say, okay? But for some of them, they have already got into this sense of I'm a soprano, I'm an alto. But that first year, you may not be able to go there. But just know that you need to try to help them sing as much as possible for your treble voices. Make sure that they are not always stuck in that lower part of the range. Particularly, why? Because most of them are going to be singing with what? What they know on the, not the radio, or maybe the radio, which already has a collapse range. So them being able to sing in their head voice is probably not that often, right? So they need to continue to have access to be able to sing in the upper part of their range as much as possible, okay? So if you go ahead and get Nina to where all Nina does is sing in that part 2 range, then Nina may never get access to the head voice range, okay, for that entire 3 years. Do you see where I'm going with that? So trying to give them opportunities to sing in the head voice range, okay? All right, so what are some other things that you hear in the middle school level? That you've been, what else have you noticed? Yes?
For the boys, that's when their voices are the most.
Yes, that's a very big thing, right? So what do we say to those male adolescent voices? All right, you're going through the voice change, so just stop singing? No, okay? They need to sing through the voice change, okay? And so what do we ask them? What are some things that you're gonna wanna work with them on? Pressing the voice more? Sing into that sound. Lighten the sound up. What are we gonna be doing? Have you noticed what are some of the sound qualities of that sound? They go from a very clear sound and on the unchanged voice to where it starts to get this is what the literature says, okay? It starts to develop what it is called a huskier sound. Not as clear, huskier, yes. Not as clear. And the reason why, anatomy-wise, the reason that is happening is because in the vocal folds, okay, there is not as much adduction happening. That means the vocal folds are not coming together as much, okay? And also, the vocal folds are starting to thicken. Okay, so that's why there's that huskier sound in the vocal folds too. Okay? So we're gonna have a unit talking about middle school voices and why the adolescent male voices start to sound the way they do, so you can know what you're dealing with, so you can also empower them by telling them exactly what's going on. Because I have found with your adolescent male voices, if you tell them exactly what's going on, it empowers them and makes them feel like, okay, this is not, like some mutant hasn't crawled into my body, okay? Well, females also go through a voice change too, right? So not only is it intonation that sometimes is an issue, but what else happens? Have you noticed what the female voice starts to have some characteristics of? Breathiness. And it's the same thing, is that the vocal folds are not coming together because the vocal folds are growing at a high rate. Because we know, particularly for the females, they grow at a very fast rate, quicker than the boys initially, right? And so those vocal folds are not coming together and there's air escaping. So we're gonna wanna make sure, particularly in our warm-ups, in our curriculum, that we give a lot of chance to have a vocal adduction, so a lot of staccati exercises. Those are warm-ups that encourage vocal adduction. So if you're a middle school choir teacher or a ninth grade, high school, you're going to want to do a lot of staccato arpeggios because those are encouraging vocal adduction. Okay? So I'm giving you a little drive-by into assessing what you're hearing, because what I'm trying to get you to understand is you may or may not know, but you're assessing all the time about what you're hearing in your class. And then you then should connect that with what is taught. But I think sometimes as a class or as you in this early part of your career, you don't make the connection that for our class, for the choir, that our curriculum is the repertoire. So once you find out, okay, this is what really needs to happen, then you need to find the music that will really fit. And that's why when you hear teachers say, the time that I spend a lot of the most on is what? Do you hear part teachers say this? Is finding the right piece of music. And that's true. Because trying to find the right piece of music, trying to address a particular thing that you're trying to work on, it can take you a long time. First of all, just trying to find good repertoire that's not crap, right? So that's the first thing. But also, like, oh, I really need to find a piece of music that's going to work on my treble voices, in the upper part of their range, right? Or my basses, in the lower part, and develop their, my low baby basses. Whatever it is, okay? There's so many things that you can try to have to work on within your curriculum. Okay? All right, so what is taught? Okay. Not only is what is taught, when is it taught? Is that important? Like, for example, is it important that I teach the lines and spaces of the treble clef before I teach about secondary dominance?
No.
Is it? Probably. Probably, I think so. I think it's probably important, right? I mean, I could teach secondary dominance, but I think it probably is important to kind of be able to identify the lines and spaces before I can say, this is a secondary dominant, can you identify this? Probably is better if they can identify the lines and spaces, right? So it's also important to know when is it taught in the curriculum, okay?
else give me another example of why this might be important? What's another example? Ben, what do you
Maybe
think?
like, you don't wanna like start the school year off with like any crazy like piece of music, like you wanna kind of like start slow and get into like the harder repertoire and sight reading and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's like, you're right, how about, maybe before we, introduce four-part sight reading, maybe we should start off with our sixth graders, just maybe unison, stepwise sight reading. So, when is it taught is also just as important as what is taught. So, sequential spiral curriculum is extremely important, okay? So curriculum, what is taught, when is it taught is also important. And then you need to think about, it has to be planned, and then when it is implemented. That can be a beautiful thing about the teaks, is because if you ever sit down and look at the teaks holistically, you can kind of start to see how it does progress in sophistication, right? You're not teaching, something very challenging to maybe your second graders, to where maybe you are talking about, maybe some sophisticated concepts to maybe your high school students. But also, let's not forget, and this goes with your learning theories too, right? As we were talking about stages like Piaget and all of these things, we also know that as we're starting to have more formal operations where our children are able to think more abstractly, then we are able to maybe talk about, text in our choral music in a very sophisticated way, right? What might be an example of that maybe we might not be able to talk about for a third grader? So let me ask it this way. When we're talking about choral music, because we have so much choral music with the literary text, right? What might be an example that we could engage a high school student who is now in what we call abstract thinking, okay? That maybe we can't ask a fourth grader that's not in abstract thinking. And this goes back to, when is it taught? Yeah.
I think if we can get into choral repertoire that is in foreign languages, or where the topics of the foreign language have to deal with, like, I don't want to say necessarily religious aspects, but like for example, the piece that we're doing in ACAP, is it Evangelism? It's like an excerpt of, I don't know if it's scripture, but it's like, it requires you to analyze and think about what you're seeing on a deeper level than with like the third grader. You wouldn't necessarily pick repertoire that has a topic that is nearly that more advanced. Like you might want to pick something that's in a language that they might already know, they're more exposed to, and about a topic that that is at their level of understanding and development at that age. Like you wouldn't pick something about, like, I don't know, war. The third grader, you might pick something about being kind to everybody or loving, but it's that kind of level of development in text that's important, I think.
Sure.
To differentiate.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. Okay. Any questions about the curriculum part of what we're doing? Let's move on to instruction. In instruction, what do you think we need to concern ourselves with? Yeah.
How is it?
Yes, our methodology. What is our methodology? Okay? What is our pedagogy? Let's spell that right. It doesn't look right on the board when I spell it that way. What is our methodology? What is our pedagogy? How are we going to deliver our concepts? Okay? That's really important. Just as important as curriculum, right? Okay, so now someone give me an example of, quickly, a concept in a curriculum, right? That is a good concept, but then flawed instruction. Can you think of that? So a good concept, but flawed instruction. So what is taught, when it's taught, and and then instruction, methodology, pedagogy, or how you deliver concepts. Yeah.
I guess the example that the book had was with like a dialogue teacher student,
Mm-hmm.
and it was to the teacher wanted the student to talk about Mozart, but he approached it in such a way that it was just everywhere. Okay, what's a very important composer? Beethoven, not quite. Schubert, not quite. And so
Like
it
a
was
guessing
just
game.
messy.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
So history, I guess, the concept of a like classical era and very important composer in classical era, but then not giving instructions correctly, or yeah, it was just messy.
Okay. Good. Is there another one?
I think maybe musicality sometimes, when we expect our choirs to do something, but we don't communicate what we want done with our conducting, or like how we communicate that, sometimes can be flawed.
Okay. And you know, this is good because this is why, and you know, I think I probably need to review this in my class too. I haven't talked about this, and this is why I love these. That's why I love these rules here. The rule of diphthong, the rule of dissonance, the rule of punctuation, the rule of repetition, the rule of slur, steady beat, and so forth, right? Because it gives you a way to start off with how to be expressive. Are there times to where there are going to be exceptions to this? Of course. But it puts what? It puts ownership and empowerment into the singers without having to always, as a conductor, say, no, crescendo here, or always, you know, and so it gives this the performers or the singers or the clarinet players, whoever it is, the sense of that they have to actively engage all the time about what they are doing, right? But yes, you're right, and it reminds me that I need to also continue to reinforce this as well. Yeah, good. What on a different note, what is a good concept and what is a good instruction? Yes.
I would say like if you're teaching like a piece that's has like a lot of emotional like feeling and stuff like that, and if you want your choir to kind of show that emotion and provide that in their musicality, but also like on their faces and stuff like that, you have to provide that in your conducting and in your face and making sure you're showing them what you want them to do.
Good, very good, great. Okay, we have to move on to assessment now. Do you know what that root means, assessment? That root word assess means to sit beside. That's interesting, isn't it? Okay? Assessment, to sit beside. So what are we looking at when we're thinking about assessment? Methods, and tools to check for growth. Always a process, right? And what are two ways that we can assess? Formal and informal, right? Okay. I think as music educators, hopefully at some point, you're going to look back and say, I'm very good at informal assessment, right? I've just cut the choir off. Hopefully you have just assessed all the things that you need to, to talk about. And probably you then have to prioritize because there's probably, you can't just tell everything that the choir needs to work on, right? You have to prioritize. What is the thing that I need to tell the choir now that is going to be the best for the choir at this moment, right? Okay. What we are not as good at as, and I say collectively as music educators, as is the formal assessment. And that's why I'm taking so much time right now at the beginning of the semester to talk with you about the formal. Because that is where the music advocacy and also the part with you as young teachers is going to come in play. Because when your principal comes in and says, well, okay, can you show me that where your students are growing? And you say, oh yeah, definitely. Mr. Murphy, here it is. Let me show you, right? I did a pre-test at the very beginning, and this is where my students were. About halfway through, I did another test, and this is where they are now. And see, this is one student right here, right? I mean, that's just one possible formal assessment that you could do, right? There's so many, and hopefully you are learning about other different types of assessment. But we're really good at informal. We need to do better at formal assessments, right? But one of the things I hope that you got from your reading is probably as a secondary teacher, that's what this class is about, secondary choral, probably your ability to grade on attendance is not going to be favorable for most school districts, right? So you have to have other ways to come up with a grade, or at least that's not the only way that you can grade, right? So you'll need to find out right away if that's the case, because if it's not, you will need to find other ways to assess your students, or also additional ways to assess your students as well, right? Okay. What are some ways that you think you could assess your students other than just attendance? Yes?
Finder checks, like making sure they're marking music and
Definitely.
Part testing.
Part testing, yes. Other ways? Yes.
Like exit, entrance tickets, about,
Mhm.
about, maybe the content they learned that day.
Right. Good. Do you think for them to be successful, they need to have a certain degree of music literacy? Okay, so things like lines and spaces of the treble and bass clef and note values and rhythm and stuff like that, yeah?
Yeah, we always had like a quiz in the middle of like the semester and then one at like the end because we required finals. And that was just kind of a composition of all of that music literacy and then ear trainings every morning before class, very short and sweet. And then Fridays it was like this one you're gonna turn in and that's how I'm gonna assess how you're doing on ear training by yourself without,
Good.
little things like that.
Great, yes.
Something my teacher did was he would give us little like sheets that had like a whole scale written out and like columns, and then he would play like a series of pitches and you would highlight like the solfege, and then we would turn that in.
Yeah. Did you all have solfege checks too? Like, can you do the solfege hand signs or whatever? Yeah.
Maybe like having after a concert, I know we always did this, is our teacher would show us like the class period after a concert, he would show us and we'd have to write like a paper on like the musicality and like the issues that we saw, so it tests like what they know about what they picked up on you saying when you're evaluating them.
Yeah, that's always a good one too. And particularly that is a great one where you can help students engage higher level thinking skills. That's, I think, a great one to engage higher level thinking skills and evaluative skills, synthesis skills, I think is an outstanding one. Yes, great. And that brings us to our last one is evaluation. After you've assessed, then you have to evaluate. Remember that evaluation is a snapshot of mastery at that time. At a given moment. Okay. Your evaluation is a snapshot of mastery at a given time, right? All-state process is, people go through the all-state process. That's a snapshot of mastery at a given time. I don't know how many stories of people who have made it one year and on in the next year and didn't make it, for whatever given reason, right? Or people who are really good musicians who never make it. Maybe because of anxiety or for whatever reason. It's just a snapshot, right? There are judgments that are being made at any given time. And there are grades given and there's comparisons given, right? And that goes back to this progress that we've been talking about. And then what do you think I put bias at the end of that? Is bias a real thing in the world?
Yeah.
Okay. How can we cut down on our bias? Yes. Sorry? Rubrics. If we can have clear expectations on our grading, that helps it to be very clear for our students on how they're being assessed. But it also helps us as the evaluator to cut down on any type of bias that we may come into this with. Shanice, were you want to add something?
Yeah, I think also when we were doing like our assessments or doing other evaluations and stuff, just making them as objective as possible is one thing we both talked about. That can help us keep our bias evaluated.
Yeah, yes.
And then also letting students also self-assess to see like how they felt about it, because maybe that will also give us some more input.
Yeah. how do you all feel about that self-assessment part? I'm glad that you all are open to that. And I will say, self-assessment started coming around when I was a kind of a young teacher. I like to think I'm still a young teacher. I'm not. And you know, I will say, I tried it out, and I was pleasantly surprised that I will tell you that the students are really hard on themselves. I was like, okay, are they gonna like just give themselves easy A's? They are very, very hard on themselves. And so I don't know if you're in this kind of the same camp, like, oh, you know, as I was at the beginning, or are they gonna just give themselves all A's? So try out self-assessment. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised that for the most part, they are really pretty challenging on themselves as far as giving their self-assessment with their rubrics. So remember, the last thing I want to talk to you about before we talk about our couple of classes coming ahead, that in your assessments, you should and need to have assessments, but be smart about your assessments, right? You can make up some pretty incredible assessments, but don't forget that you have to grade your assessments, right? And remember, you as the choir teacher, probably like the band, and particularly the band, you may have the most students in your class. And so think about your assessment times 30 in a class, and then times maybe 120 in your program. And then say, is that still an assessment that I want to do? Is it a great assessment? It's a great assessment, but is it also a great assessment that I can do somewhat relatively quickly for 120 students? And is it still effective? Does that make sense? Question?
Yeah, I just wanted to know if there's time for you to maybe give an example of the sort of assessment that you've done.
Yes. I don't know if it's in the assessment that I put on in the packet on the D2L, but I gave my students I would always give an assessment weekly, and they would also do a self-assessment weekly. I'll have to look to see if I included that or not. I can't remember. If not, I'll try to bring that to next week. Next class period and show you, okay? I might not have included that in there, okay? All right, and then just quickly before we leave, let's just look at where we're going now. I think we're a little bit ahead that we can do just a little bit something here now. On next class period, you're going to have do your assessment on your piano skills. Several of you told me when I met with you that you want to be really held accountable for your piano skills, okay, which is great. You will have an opportunity to have your own self-assessment, and that is, you'll find that on page 35. We're gonna have copies of that in the choral office, so you don't have to make copies of it from your book. Would you please hand that in of your assessment for Thursday's class, okay? And I will go ahead and tell you, I'm gonna demonstrate also next class what I expect out of your assessment for your piano midterm. I will demonstrate that on Thursday's class, so that if you have any questions, that will be an opportunity for you to ask then. And that due date is also in the class syllabus. And then lastly, I think we'll have enough time and probably be ready that I can go ahead and probably start working on modeling the beginnings of teaching 1. And that will be warm-ups, sight reading, and warm-up and sight reading. What's going to be a little different from from your previous is, we're gonna be combining skills, not isolating warm-ups and isolating sight reading, but combining them to where you have long periods of teaching that you're up for, okay? Questions, friends?
Are they available in the whole office?
They will be,
They will.
as in probably,
Print them in like 2 minutes.
yeah, okay?
Thank you.
Good, thank you, everybody.
I might actually just place it. Cause that's closer.
Yeah, and that's a whole different thing. First of all, that's a very short time.
Right.
In camp that,
Yeah.
you know, that's the first thing. The second thing is, you have to also know the climate. If your client is not here,